Hi guys, Danielle from Test Obsessed here, and today I want to bring you a brief lesson about the importance of pronouns. You might be thinking to yourself, well, there isn't a grammar section on the TOEFL, so these things probably aren't that important. But I think by the time we're done here, you'll see how knowing pronoun rules can really ultimately benefit your TOEFL score. So let's get right into it. Before we talk about specific pronoun rules, there is some background vocabulary that you need to be familiar with. You'll want to know these words because they'll come in handy when we're talking about the various categories of pronoun and what you need to know in order to make the rule apply. The first word we need to know is pronoun itself. Now, obviously, a pronoun is a word that replaces a noun, and that is usually the most common version of the definition that's given. There are some situations in which case our pronoun will be used to modify a noun, though, so keep an eye out for that as well. The word antecedent is one of the most important terms that you'll need to know. The antecedent is the word that the pronoun itself refers back to. You'll recognize that prefix ante, A-N-T-E, which means before. So typically we are going to look at the word that the pronoun refers to before the pronoun itself. It might be earlier in the sentence, or it might be in the previous sentence, or even the one before that. So make sure you know where to look for this important word, antecedent, as we go through the various pronoun categories. Other words that you need to know. The most important one here is agreement. Just like you need to have agreement when it comes to your subjects and verbs, you also need to have agreement when it comes to your pronouns. When we are talking about agreement, it means that the antecedent and the pronoun itself match in terms of sometimes number, how many of that person or thing are involved, gender, male or female, if you're talking about a person, case, which refers to the context of the sentence, meaning is it used as an object in this particular sentence, or is it going to be the subject, for example, known as the nominative, and the distance that is involved. Are you trying to explain that is very close or very far, which comes into play for our relative pronouns? The type of thing that is being encountered. So while nouns refer to all people, places, and things, certain types of pronouns can only work with people or only work with inanimate objects like items and objects. And the last one is necessity. Is this vital to the sentence, or are you giving me additional information? Now, all of these things could impact which pronoun you need to select when you are making your decisions. But for the most part, it's not going to be every single one on this list that you need to think about. Instead, each category relies on a handful of these factors when determining what you need for agreement purposes. In terms of our pronouns, there are two big types of pronouns that we find ourselves working with regularly in the English language, and those would be definite and indefinite pronouns. Indefinite pronouns, just like their name suggests, don't refer to something specific. You would think of words like any, all, some as important types of examples of indefinite pronouns. While the rules for some of these can get a little bit tricky, they tend to be more commonly tested on exams like the SAT. So for our purposes, we're only going to be worried about these definite pronouns for today. Don't worry, there are still lots of categories to get into. But the reason we want to focus on these are the pronouns that the TOEFL most commonly tests. In fact, there's a specific type of question on the reading section all about these definite pronouns. So, what are the types of definite pronouns? This is not an exhaustive list. There are a few that we will not be going into, but these are the ones that you're going to want to know for TOEFL success. Personal, possessive, reflexive, intensive, relative, and demonstrative. For our purposes for today's video and time's sake, we're only going to talk about our first three: personal, possessive, and reflexive. When it comes to personal pronouns, those are probably the ones that you immediately think of because they are the ones that you learn about when you're conjugating verbs. I, you, he, she, it, we, and they. When it comes to selecting the right personal pronoun, you absolutely need to know how many people you're talking about, how it's being used in a sentence, meaning do you have the subject of the sentence where you'd be using a word like I, or do you have an object in the sentence where you're going to want to switch over to me? And of course, gender is going to matter here. That's going to be the difference between selecting he versus she, for example, although it's not as important when we get into larger groups like those with we and they. For personal pronouns, you really want to look out for them on the speaking and writing section, especially for consistency. You don't want to keep using one person's name over and over and over again, so you'll be expected to use a personal pronoun to take them out. So if you're talking about your brother, for example, instead of using his name over and over, you'll start using he or him, depending on the case of the sentence. Possessives go hand in hand with personal. In this case, they are going to show belonging. In other words, something that is owned by someone else. The most important thing to remember with this group of pronouns is for the writing section. Don't put an apostrophe S in the words that already have S on the end, like yours and hers. People get really confused when it comes to its. Be really careful for that one. It's with that apostrophe in it doesn't make it possessive. It actually makes it is. The last one that we're going to talk about today, and it's one that's not as commonly seen, is our reflexive pronouns. This is when the person who is the subject of the sentence is also going to be receiving the action of the sentence. So he lied to himself, for example. Again, not as common, but one you want to be familiar with for speaking, writing, and listening purposes. Make sure you tune in next time when we talk about our remaining groups of pronouns, which are going to be our intensive, also known as our emphatic pronouns, our demonstrative, and our relative pronouns, ones that are very frequently tested on the reading section. If you like this video, please be sure to subscribe and follow us on Instagram for even more TOEFL vocab and grammar lessons. I'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye.